All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Mack, a live look there in Washington, D.C. at the White House. Thank you to my colleague Stephanie Quinu for guiding you the last several hours. I'm Mack now here in the anchor chair. And let's get more into what we heard from the White House earlier on today at the press briefing as Secretary Caroline Leavitt talking about the administration, President Donald Trump reaffirming that the administration's position when it comes to nuclear negotiations with Iran, saying Tehran will not be allowed any enrichment of uranium. Let's take you out to this report here on Live Now from Fox from Rebecca Castor.
They can't have a nuclear weapon.
That's been the position of the Trump administration on Iran. But according to the UN's nuclear watchdog, Iran is close to having enough enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon, increasing its stockpile by 50% over the last 3 months.
The way you enrich uranium is called a centrifuge. And think of a salad spinner. You spin the salad spinner a little ways and you get low enriched uranium. That's what you use for civilian reactors. You keep spinning that salad spinner and you got highly enriched uranium, and that's what's used in a bomb.
The development adds new pressure to U.S. negotiators trying to reach a nuclear deal with Iran. Publicly, U.S. officials and President Trump say any deal would require Iran to stop enriching uranium entirely.
This is a country that has orchestrated attempts on President Trump's life. They cannot have a nuclear weapon, and we should treat any agreement with Iran with a great deal of skepticism.
But according to a report from Axios, a new U.S. proposal would allow Tehran to continue enriching uranium at low levels.
The administration must clarify what they might be hiding from the American people in this secret side deal.
Iran has said it won't sign any deal that does not allow them to continue uranium enrichment, which they insist is for peaceful purposes only. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
All right, thank you so much. And White House Press Secretary said that President Donald Trump was very clear in his message on social media, talking about Iran not allowing them to have any enrichment of uranium, and if they don't, they will face grave consequences. That from 11. You can see this was the post saying, under our potential agreement, we will not allow any enrichment of uranium. And of course, this comes, as you heard there, from this scoop by Axios, corroborated by other outlets, of course, saying that the proposal provided to Tehran alleged the U.S. would agree to permit a limited low level of uranium enrichment on Iranian soil to be determined period of time. Let's bring into the conversation right now for more on this, Director of Foreign Policy for JINSA, Jonathan Ruhe. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Leavitt said they should agree to this, no uranium or face grave consequences. What could those grave consequences be?
I think that's a very good question, given that we are at a watershed moment now where a deal has literally been put on the table. If I'm the Iranians right now, I don't worry particularly about what those grave consequences may be. If I'm the Iranians, I think I've got the United States right where I want them, which is the United States openly negotiating with itself and with its Israeli partner over what a deal is going to look like. And right now, that's very open-ended. Iran would like nothing more than to drag out these talks, not be forced to say yes or no to anything, and just see what else it can get by playing for time.
Yeah, and of course, they said during that press briefing that they didn't want to talk about these negotiations in public, but all of this reporting coming out from Axios and others about this, saying they would potentially allow a low-level limit on uranium enrichment. Take me back, though, because we had a deal in place back in 2015. It was negotiated by then-President Barack Obama. Trump pulled out of that pact. Is this potential deal that others are reporting similar to the one in 2015?
To the extent we know what might be in it, I worry that the answer is indeed yes, given that the argument right now is over what level of enrichment, where, under what circumstances, rather than an unequivocal no enrichment from the United States. If you look back in the years running up to the JCPOA, the deal you mentioned that Obama negotiated, his original red lines, his demands for a deal were very strong. No enrichment. Iran has to come clean on weaponization, no nuclear capable missiles, no underground facilities, things like that. And we ended up with what was fundamentally an unacceptable, untenable deal that President Trump then left. Currently, I would caution people against assuming it's a one-to-one or apples-to-apples comparison, because through no real fault of President Trump, right now, if Iran would like nothing more than to agree to something like the strictures of the JCPOA, at least in the interim, because right now its nuclear program is far more advanced than the one President Obama had to deal with a decade ago.
All right, that is a good point. I just wanted to put some historical context to that. And of course, this is all happening, the United States and Iran, but Israel is also there waiting potentially to strike some of these nuclear facilities, some sites there as well. They're waiting on a determination. And this, when Netanyahu hears some of these reports coming out about them allowing some enrichment, although there is a now reaffirmed from President Trump that they won't allow any enrichment, what is Israel thinking right now?
So I think right now they're thinking that the clock is ticking louder with every passing second. I think the Israeli perspective is less over the specifics of what's being negotiated right now, although they have made clear that zero enrichment and zero capacity to resume enrichment is what their red line is. But more importantly, I think for Israel is the prospect, and from their perspective, a very discouraging one, is that Iran will indeed enmesh the United States in long, drawn-out negotiations, neither giving a yes or a no to any specific proposal, because Iran has learned under both Obama and Biden that as long as the U.S. is at the negotiating table, there is no military option, be it U.S. or Israeli. So if I'm the Israelis, my main concern is not the specific proposals we've seen traded back and forth, as you mentioned, the Axios article, but rather the fact that these very likely appear to be open-ended negotiations.
Yeah, that's a good point. Of course, a yes or a no would go a long way in terms of certainty. And I do want to ask you, because it feels like we are an absolute stalemate, and we heard about those grave consequences, but what would it take to get past this stalemate?
So I think to get past this stalemate in a positive sense from American perspective is to make Iran really fear the consequences of doing what it's been doing successfully so far, dragging out talks, neither saying yes or no. The Iranian regime actually does respond very positively from America's perspective to the threat of military force when it's faced with it. Unfortunately, that almost never happens, especially at the negotiating table. So right now, what you need is the opposite of what we've been seeing, which is the United States and Israel publicly picking fights with one another, Trump openly telling the Israelis, there's no military option for you as long as we're in talks. Let me try to get a deal first. So I think right now, it's going to take, in the very little time we have left, it's going to take much more clear U.S.-Israeli alignment that there is a clock. Trump gave an official 60-day deadline to the Supreme Leader. The most charitable interpretation of that deadline is it comes up next week. Iran would like nothing more than escape past that deadline and keep talks going. So right now it would take, borderline Herculean efforts. The United States and Israel would be clearly on the same page that Iran can either agree to an acceptable deal post haste or face consequences where it loses that program through other means.
All right. And of course, we continue to wait. It continues to be pushed off a little bit. And I do want to ask you, because it's so very interesting that the report from Axios comes out that they potentially would have a low limit of uranium enrichment. President Trump responds on social media saying we will not allow any enrichment of uranium. And we talk about the negotiation back in 2015. We talk about Obama with Biden, with Trump now in these negotiations. We've all heard about Iran and their uranium enrichment program and its progress most recently. I want to ask you, how is no deal better than some deal, even though it might not be politically appealing to Donald Trump? How is no deal better than some deal?
It's a great question, and it's one that's always put proponents of a strong, acceptable deal on the back foot against proponents of a weak deal like the JCPOA, because as we saw President Obama and his administration say in 2015 when the JCPOA was agreed, it's either this deal or war. We've seen a similar thing from within the Trump administration as these talks have developed, portraying that any failure of talks, any failure to get a deal becomes World War III in the Middle East. Iran loves that we frame it that way, because it helps ensure that we stay at the table and forswear all military options. So I think the question is more accurately framed, not a deal versus no deal, but no deal versus a bad deal. Because with the JCPOA, the one thing it did was buy you time to actually figure out how to prevent a nuclear Iran at the cost of, Iran eventually got a legitimated nuclear program. They want that again. They want recognition of their right to enrich so that zero enrichment is never a consideration ever again, and that they essentially have a latent nuclear weapon capability. So the question is now, is an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure? And so, the one thing that has not been tried is to actually force the Iranians to say, here's the cost of no deal, which is you lose the program through other means. So until you test that proposition, I think it's in some ways a false dichotomy, the no deal versus any deal at this point, because any deal would eventually be worse in the long run.
Yeah, that is a good point. I just wanted to ask that. So very interesting. Jonathan Ruhe, anything else that you're monitoring in terms of this? What comes next? What we're looking forward to? Anything else that you can provide insight on?
The one thing I would add is, in parallel to everything we've discussed, the IAEA, the international inspectors tasked with verifying that Iran has a peaceful nuclear weapons program, or nuclear program as the Iranians claim, they are set to issue what they call a comprehensive report that details how Iran has failed in its obligations as a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty by building a secret nuclear weapons program, advancing that to a point where they could have a bomb in short order, and lying about it the entire time. That's coming to a head as well right now. Iran, like they do in the talks with the United States, those talks with the IAEA, Iran feels like it has the upper hand now because they're threatening our European partners, the ones who can censure Iran for that. Iran is threatening, we'll leave the NPT if you advance any penalties, the snapback that it's called, for our frankly blatant violations of our treaty obligations. So I would note that people should keep an eye on that. And I would also critique the U.S. position by saying those need to be aligned with our own negotiations with the Iranians. Right now, Iran is playing the United States and Europe separately. There's a lot of daylight there, just like there is between the United States and Israel. And that right there is the equation for a bad deal.
All right, very good. Jonathan Ruhe, it feels like we're in Groundhog's Day almost, seeing this conversation happen time and time again. Of course, Caroline Leavitt saying they need to agree to this deal or potentially face grave consequences. Thank you so much for your time, your insight here on Live Now.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, great conversation there as always.